All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think maybe we'll give it another minute to see if more people will join us. We've got 24 participants right now, so let's give it one more minute. Thanks for bearing with us. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start, and I'll talk slowly so that more people can join. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for spending Busy Tuesday with us. My name is Linda Yu, and I am the Development Director for Studio Red. Studio Red is an investment fund that is part of the venture arm of the American Heart Association. Joining me today as co-presenters are Heather Wilder, Managing Director of Studio Red, Tracy Warren, Senior Managing Director of our Go Red for Women Fund, and Jessica Bittinger, National Senior Director of Research and Grants Administration. Together, we welcome you to today's informational webinar for the American Heart Association's Redefining Women's Health from Heart to Head to Hormones research grant, which is being co-administered by the Heart Association's Office of Scientific Operations and AHA Ventures. Just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the American Heart Association Professional Heart Daily webpage in the next few days. I'll flash that website up on the next slide. We also ask that you all remain on mute and please put all questions in the designated Q&A box. We will have a designated Q&A section at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to put questions into the box as we move through the webinar. Before we jump in, just wanted to share this link with everyone. Our team will also put it in the chat so you can have easy access. A majority of the questions we get about the grant are answered on the webpage or are linked through the webpage. It's going to contain recordings of the webinars, important deadlines, required documents, and the RFP. Some upcoming important deadlines. The required pre-proposal deadline is Tuesday, January 6, 2026, right after the holidays. We gave you a few extra days. Invitations to submit a full proposal will be sent out in mid-February, and the application submissions will all go through Proposal Central, which is our grant administration platform. Jessica will pop up a link to the tutorial for how to use Proposal Central in the chat box as well. Today's webinar will cover the following topics. We'll go through a summary and purpose of the grant. We'll dig deep into the priority research areas. We'll talk about the award details, go through the required pre-proposal process, and highlight some relevant policies and requirements. And then lastly, we'll end with the Q&A portion. So now I'll hand it over to Heather Wilder to talk a bit about the Studio Red Fund and provide an overview and purpose of the grant, followed by Tracy to review the priority research areas.
Thank you, Linda. Hi, everyone. As Linda mentioned, my name is Heather Wilder, and I am the Managing Director of Studio Red, which is the American Heart Association Ventures early stage incubator. So we work with very early stage technologies, projects, and companies to help transform them either into companies and to help them scale and grow. So this graphic sort of defines the point where we enter the scene. And so this translational research grant is really helping support the academia, research laboratories, and healthcare entrepreneurs like yourself to get a little farther in that research and the applied research phase to where we can work with you in Studio Red after the grant to help translate your research into a successful company and get those products to patients and actually create that clinical impact that we all want to see. So if we go to the next slide. So this is a lot of text, but I want to summarize some of the key points about the research grant. So we are inviting researchers, clinicians, and entrepreneurs to submit these pre-proposals for funding, specifically in the women's health priority areas that Tracy will speak about next. There's excuse me, a total of 1 million in up to 10 projects of $100,000 each to help again with that translational part of your research to really get it ready to pitch to studio and then translate that into a commercially viable company. So this third bullet point here, during that 1 year award period through the grant, Studio Red will also help provide a lot of the support and educational context for all of the grantees. So we will do webinars and some one-on-one mentoring with each of the grantees to really deliver content around IP, regulatory strategy, reimbursement, and commercialization to help you get ready and prepare your pitch at the end of the grant period. And then that leads us to the last part of this. So at the conclusion of your award period, we will do a bit of a pitch competition where you and your fellow other 10 grantees will pitch to the Studio Red team and a panel of experts, and we'll select actually 1 to 2 awardees to come into Studio Red and incubate that technology into a company alongside us. And that does come with additional funding and resources and support to really help turn that into a commercially viable entity. So with that, I'll pass it over to Tracy, and she can tell you a little bit more about the priority areas that we're looking
at. Thanks, Heather. Again, we've selected as a first cut for the field here to think about several areas within the health of women that we believe need new and novel solutions. And again, I think as the footnote states, right, these can be health tools, therapeutics, diagnostics, predictive analytics, sort of strongly encourage interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary teams for these complex challenges. So our research areas include ischemia with non-obstructive coronary arteries. So thinking about microvascular cardiovascular disease and other areas that are poorly diagnosed and have long patient journeys. Within autoimmune disease, whether that is screeners, predicting, or innovative care models with evidence-based backing. Endometriosis, particularly thinking about patients who are younger and looking for beyond hormonal suppression opportunities to treat endometriosis. And similarly with heavy menstrual bleeding, so particularly classifications and things that can really guide treatment. I think in all of these areas, one thing to keep in mind is we're really looking for solutions that can change the course of clinical care delivery and set new standards for care. So big and bold ideas are welcome.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much, Heather and Tracy. Now I'll go over the award details. The duration of the award is 1 year. This award will be distributed to up to 10 grantees at $100,000 per selected project. This includes a maximum of 10% indirect costs. Note that the Heart Association Awards can only go to US-based nonprofit institutions, and it is the institutions who are then responsible for managing and maintaining all subcontracts and for paying PIs and subcontractors not directly employed at the institution. And awards will be selected based on scientific merit and how each group aligns with the Heart Association's mission and goals. For the pre-proposal, we require a research proposal maximum of 5 pages long, which includes a research plan that describes an innovative approach to research addressing one of the 4 priority research areas referred to in the RFP and that Tracy just reviewed, a description of the team, particularly highlighting the team's experience with or capacity to develop new tools and methods that support creative approaches to the proposed research studies, ethical, legal, and social implications, and a development and commercialization plan for the technology. So while we're not requiring a full business plan at this pre-proposal stage, it is important to address at a high level the unmet need, market opportunity for the proposed technology, product, or service, and development and commercialization timelines. You may also upload a 2-minute video, which we have marked as optional, but I want to highlight is highly encouraged and recommended by our team. This is really a great opportunity for you to showcase, yourself and your team and your technology. We also ask that you provide a bio sketch for the PI only and citations. No other uploads are permitted at this stage. For a list and full details of all relevant AHA policies and requirements, please visit the webpage to read those in full. Here, I'm just going to highlight a few that are of specific importance for this grant. So first, AHA research awards are limited to US-based nonprofit institutions. We mentioned this before. I'm highlighting this here because we have gotten a lot of questions about who is eligible. Are startups eligible? Are international institutions eligible? I think they are. You can be eligible if you have an anchor to a US-based nonprofit institution. So the funding can only go to a US-based nonprofit institution, including 501(c) entities. And if if the funding goes there, then they will have to manage, that institution will have to manage the awarding to other entities outside of the 501(c). Secondly, Heart professional membership is required to submit a pre-proposal application. So it may take up to 10 days to process new and renewing membership. So please do take care of this as soon as possible if you plan to submit an application. And lastly, because of the translational nature of this grant and the goal, like Heather mentioned, of selecting 1 to 2 awardees at the end of the grant cycle to incubate into a company through Studio Red, we do require that the awardees agree to upfront provide the Heart Association with an exclusive option to license any intellectual property rights and related know-how created or developed under the award. So this is specific to this translational grant. It is a deviation from the standard American Heart Association research grant IP policy. So I wanted to call it out here specifically. So again, to review all other relevant AHA policies and requirements, please do visit our webpage to read those in full. These are just sort of the highlights. Okay. In terms of process and timeline, we will be accepting pre-proposal applications until January 6, 2026, right after the start of the new year. Applications will be peer reviewed until mid-February, when we will send out invitations to submit full proposals. If invited to submit the full proposal, that application deadline is mid-April, April 14th, 2026. We'll send out award notifications for up to 10 awardees in June of 2026 with an award start date of July 1st, 2026. And that was our very short presentation. I'll hand it over to Jessica as we move on to the Q&A section, and we will answer all the questions that you have.
There is a question for the Studio Red team. Would a project like this be responsive for the RFA, a virtual reality intervention for stress, resilience, and blood pressure management in Black women, realist women study? This is if you want to read it, it's also in the chat in the questions.
I'm actually going to ask Tracy to provide her input on that. Do you think this falls within one of those priority areas?
I think it doesn't on its face. So if the person who submitted the question wants to give us a little more clarity on where they see it fitting, I think that would really be helpful to us. It's not obvious to me which bucket that would align to.
And there was another question, a follow-up. Since the overall amount of funding is relatively small, is the goal to submit a proposal with your larger idea or for pilot funding with future directions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know that the 5 pages. It's also pretty small. I think what we are looking for is really to better understand your research and get a feel for what the commercialization potential or how we would translate that into a product or service and to something that we could commercialize for patient impact and help you develop a company or a startup around that. So however you want to communicate that, whether it's the larger vision downstream and how that leverages your research now, or whether you wanted to scope it a little bit more and think about how you would use this 100,000 to do that, to start that translational effort, we will review and accept any and all of those. So either way is fine, is my short answer.
Thanks, Heather. There was a question in the chat regarding, can you please clarify the IP policy under this program? Linda, would you just like me to put the language from the RFP in the chat? Or did you want to speak to that anymore?
Yes, and I can, yeah, if you could in the chat, is there a specific question around the IP policy, or if you have a follow-up to the part that you want me to clarify, I'm happy to speak to it.
Linda, it looks like they've licensed to a new co for one of the founders or inventors. And so I think given that it's licensed, that there would still be an opportunity, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and there's another question here, kind of about that exclusive option piece. So this option is not a license. All we are requesting as part of the application process is really so that if you are accepted as one of the 10 into the Studio Red process, startup companies that we spin out of Studio Red will need to ultimately be the owners of that IP. So this is fairly common with tech transfer offices when companies spin out of an academic or medical institution for the company to own the eventual IP. So all we are asking for is an exclusive option during that studio incubation period, if you are selected to join the studio, where we can discuss the terms of a license for when we ultimately spin that out. So I hope that answers one of the questions in the chat.
Yes, and just a quick note to follow up on that. If you are awarded the grant and are not selected as the 1 or 2 awardees at the end, but have generated IP, in that case, I think we would, not I think, but in that case, the IP would just be subject to the standard AHA research grant policy. And this exclusive option would not apply.
So that only applies if you're selected for studio incubation.
I think there's a question for Tracy in the chat about if you could share more about the connection of endometriosis and heavy menstrual bleeding to the overall mission of the AHA, which has been focused on heart and vascular health.
That is a great question, and thank you for asking. I should have covered that. So with the establishment of the Go Red for Women Venture Fund, we are looking at all conditions that increase your risk of cardiovascular disease or adverse neurological conditions. And so our aperture is actually quite broad when we look at topic areas. So we look at things that differently or disproportionately affect women, as well as in this case, the 2 they've cited that distinctly affect women. But all of those tend to be tied to greater stroke risk, greater cardiovascular disease risk, et cetera. So it's sort of a dotted line to our mission here at the American Heart Association. But from a investment and a thesis perspective of unmet medical needs, we have that aperture quite wide. So yes, we look very broadly for solutions, and that's why they're included in this RFP. Good question.
There aren't any open questions. There was a chat question about considerations for prospective research and publication that I think we need a little more clarification on. if they would like to put that in the chat. And I will also put a link in the chat to our question box. We have a dedicated research application team to manage questions. So if you think of questions after the webinar, you're welcome to send them there. Okay, there was a question about how about differences in ischemic events focused on females?
Certainly within scope. So if it's not specific to INOCA, happy to take that offline to give more clarity. If you want to do that through the Q&A or the email that was posted, we can hash that out separately. It could be close enough that we would consider it. Yes.
Thank you. There was a question, most universities would require legal review before giving up IP. How have you considered this?
I can take that one. Yes, that is a great point, Wendy. And we here are not asking for the IP upfront. We are just asking for the right to negotiate an option. We're asking for the right to negotiate for the IP. We just want to have the first right of negotiation. And I also call it out here because we're hoping we do need the tech transfer officer to review this before applying for the grant. And so there would be multiple layers of review before we move forward with any sort of IP discussions.
Thank you, Linda. There was a question about how detailed should the development commercialization plan be?
I can take this one. So the development and commercialization plan is actually something that we can help you with in Studio Red later on if you get selected. So what we're looking for in this pre-proposal, and then if you're selected to submit a full application, is really more about your key research insights that can be developed and commercialized into a product or service that will ultimately impact patients downstream. So not very detailed, but if you have given some thought to how to develop or commercialize this product or service, your research, feel free to include that. Again, there's not a ton of space in the pre-proposal, but if you have given that some thought, we'd love to see what your current thinking is around commercialization. So, but you don't have to develop like a full go-to-market strategy and provide us with a business plan for this grant. That's actually something that we help with in Studio downstream.
Thank you, Heather. I think that there's sort of a bit of a follow-up question from a different participant. What are the expectations for this one-year project? For instance, should it result in a nearly finished product? And will there be additional support provided after its completion?
So we'll take these sort of one at a time. So the expectations for the one-year project, if you're selected as one of the 10 grantees, is really to start considering how we would translate your research into a commercializable product. So as I mentioned, we will be providing Studio Red and our team will be providing educational webinars to all the grantees around various topics that can help support that translation from research to commercial. And then we'll be doing a lot of, one-on-one mentoring, some pitch practice. We're going to be helping you along the way. So the expectation in that regard is just for you to engage in those and show up and learn. It's not to develop a finished product by the end of the year. And obviously, depending on the type of product or service, that may not be realistic. And so that is something that we would help with, again, in the studio, if you're selected as one of the two to be pulled into the studio after the grant period, we could definitely help continue to develop the product during that phase. So it is not required to have a nearly finished product. And then the last piece of your question, will there be any additional support provided after the completion of the grant? If you are selected for studio, yes, that is a 12 to 18 month incubation with additional funding and support from the Studio Red team. But for the grantees that are not selected to come into the studio, that will be the completion of the support from this grant.
If I could add, I mean, these are investment areas important to the Go Red for Women Fund as well here at the American Heart Association. And assuming there's a commercial fit with our investment thesis, we tend to invest in sort of Series A and later rounds of investment beyond studio. And again, can be bringing in more sizable traditional commercial venture funding.
There was a question in the chat just added. Does the aortic and the coronary arteries dissections in a women's cohort lie within your research interests?
I think I would need to learn more. So I'm happy if that person wants to send a detailed question, maybe Jessica, and then connect. I think just some clarity, we can do that offline instead of in front of everyone.
Thank you, Tracy. There are no other questions in the chat. Okay. The question in the chat is, should the evidence behind the product be fully established to be competitive for this? For example, if we are continuing to build the evidence for a novel biomarker and there are additional clinical utility studies needed to be done, then would this still be competitive or should it be further along?
I think it would still be competitive for this. So I think you should absolutely apply. You know, Studio, we take ideas on a napkin. So the fact that you have some initial evidence for a novel biomarker, and knowing what those additional clinical utility studies that would need to be done are absolutely a potential fit, and right where we tend to work with projects in Studio. So please apply.
Thank you, Heather. There was another question. Would ideas looking to change clinical care pathways, i.e. diagnosis management, be appropriate?
Yes, absolutely. I think Tracy and I were both looking at each other to say yes. So yes, absolutely. Those are areas we're very interested in.
We do not have any open questions, and I don't see any additional in the chat, but we can pause for another minute, see if there's anything additional that anybody wanted to ask. There is a question, are all consultations about our idea considered confidential with regard to IP? My venture office may require being CC'd on any meetings or involved in Zoom. Is that okay?
Yeah, especially if it's follow-up to for clarification on these things. Yes, you should definitely involve your appropriate stakeholders at your organization. We want to do this entirely above board. So we'll try to learn as much as we can non-confidentially, but and then I'm guessing on the submissions, we've already addressed that through the policies, correct?
Yes. Yes. And I think post award, if you're agreed, we definitely want to make sure everything is above board and whatever your tech transfer or venture office is comfortable with.
There was a question that was answered. I put the answer in the chat about regarding the requirements for the team, the principal investigator and other investigators. This is information that I put in the chat that is from the RFP. I did want to note that this is also just a single PI mechanism. Consultants and collaborators are permitted, but co-investigators are not. There's a question, can entrepreneurial startups apply with an eligible PI? I can go ahead and try to take this one. It's not the eligibility of the PI, it's the eligibility of the sponsoring institutions. So if the PI meets the requirements and the institution meets the requirements, they could be a consultant or a collaborator, but they could not be the principal investigator or the lead.
Maybe Linda, could you switch back to the slide that has the key eligibility requirements? Since we're getting a lot of questions there.
That one?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
All right. If there are no other questions, all the links and the email, if you have further questions that you want to reach out to us offline, are in the chat. So, Linda, anything to add to wrap up?
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. We encourage everybody to apply. We really look forward to seeing all the wonderful proposals. And like Heather and Jessica mentioned, please reach out if you have any additional questions. We're happy to take them. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Bye.